Promoting press freedom is the beating heart of the National Press Club. The annual John Aubuchon Press Freedom Award, which is named after a late club president, is a key way we express this. The award recognizes journalists who relentlessly pursue truth in the face of harassment and danger. Each year, we choose one Aubuchon honoree from the United States and another from overseas. This year's U.S. winner is Linda Tirado, an author and freelance photographer who lost most of the sight in her left eye on May 30th in Minneapolis when a police officer's foam bullet struck her as she was covering protests. Tirado's ordeal is an extreme example of an all too frequent occurrence in America today. Law enforcement personnel who appear to knowingly target reporters. The overseas Aubuchon winner this year is Maria Ressa, executive editor of Rappler, a news site in the Philippines, and her brave colleagues there. Ressa and her co-workers have withstood repeated efforts by the Philippines president to silence them, including a conviction of Ressa on phony charges of so-called cyber libel. Now, we refer to Tirado and Ressa as honorees, but it is we who are honored to call them fellow journalists. And now, let's hear from them.
I became a working journalist in 2014, and my first story that I ever covered and embedded with was in Ferguson, Missouri, just after Mike Brown was shot. And it left me kind of scarred and a bit brutalized, and it left all of us kind of scarred and a bit brutalized. Ryan Riley and Wesley Lowery were arrested while they were sitting in a McDonald's filing in the middle of the day. The police there, I thought, were going to be the most egregious example, I thought, of the repression of speech, of the repression of protest, of the repression of every protection of the First Amendment. They were not respecters of clergy. They were not respecters of assembly. And I thought that was going to be the worst that I saw. I embedded out at Malheur at the Wildlife Refuge back in 2016 when the Bundys just staged an armed rebellion for funsies, I guess. And I thought that that was going to be the most federal power I ever saw brought to bear on a story that I covered. It was less violent. It was nicer. It was polite. But I thought that was going to be the most I was ever going to cover. And then I went to Minneapolis and I spent my first night darting in and out of structure fires, taking just the amazing amount of photo roll I have that's just flames. And on my second night, I had been out for 3 or 4 hours when I walked up on an active police line and very clearly taking photos. I mean, I had a whole Nikon with a whole flash. I very clearly was not part of a protest group. I was a photographer working in that middle bit of protests where photographers always reside. And I have photos of these police officers casually drawing down, casually loading a compressed foam round into their gun, casually pointing it at me, while other officers just feet away are apparently on their cell phones and talking to each other. Like there was no world in which all of these officers thought I was a threat. And so I think that Minneapolis now might be the most power and the most repression that I'll ever see brought to bear on one of my stories. But I keep saying that, and it's a worrying trend. And I think that we're going to have to reckon with it as an industry of the risks that we are taking, of the fact that these risks keep changing, of the fact that these risks keep increasing. Because it used to be that you could go cover a story and there would be some respect for the fact that you were out there doing your job, the same as these police are out there doing their job. That line seems to be breaking, and I don't know if it's because it's years worth of us being called fake. I don't know if it's because of the change in the political climate. I don't know if it's just because we have shiny new weapons and shiny new weapons programs to fund the police with, but something has fundamentally changed. And I think that we're going to have to reckon with that both for ourselves and for our colleagues, because what we don't want is a society in which every member of the press is economically and physically not sure of what's going to happen next. We don't want a world in which that chilling effect and that professional community is broken and that chilling effect comes in, because then we stop covering the stories that matter. And the stories that matter are the ones where people are being broken and brutalized. And there is a place for every single beat in journalism, but it's very few beats where you might get shot in the face. And so we do have to pay, I think, extra special attention to covering these risky stories, to covering the stories that put us as workers at risk. And I think that we need to be thinking about how do we handle the change in our industry in a way that is supportive of us as workers and us as risk takers. So I want to say thank you so much to all of my colleagues. And I want to pay special attention to all of the journalists specifically who have been hurt this year, who have been arrested, who have been wounded. I want to say thank you especially to my mate Will Sands, who is another photographer who lost an eye to a police bullet or a police projectile. And we don't talk about him enough because I got the first headlines and we all know how the cycle works. So Will Sands from Washington, D.C., you can find his work in Mother Jones. He's doing amazing work actually around blind people and people who have been shot. And I want to say particularly thanks to Peter Callahan and Dominic Gwynn, who have been my partners in St. Louis and elsewhere. And all of the boys in Chicago, you know who you are. I finally got my own damn camera and then they shot me in the face. So you guys win.
John, thanks so much. And thank you to the National Press Club for helping us shine the light. I am fighting for my rights. The Philippine Constitution is patterned after the US, and like you, we have a Bill of Rights where press freedom is enshrined along with the right to travel. I had hoped to be here in person with you tonight, but if you're seeing this, it means Bill McCarran, my lawyers, and I have failed. On June 15th, in the middle of a pandemic lockdown, I was convicted for cyber libel in a decrepit, rundown courtroom in the Philippines for a story published 8 years ago that I didn't write, edit, or supervise at a time when the law I supposedly violated wasn't even in force. Now I could go to jail for up to 6 years. All told, the charges I face can bring a maximum penalty of nearly 100 years in prison. I'm a journalist, not a criminal. But it seems like this is what the time is takes. I've done nothing wrong. All I've done is to try to do my job, to hold power to account. I've been sounding the alarm since 2016 when Rappler, the digital news group I helped create, exposed the Duterte online propaganda networks insidiously attacking critics of a brutal drug war, the journalists, human rights activists, opposition politicians, ordinary citizens. Our journalism challenged the impunity of two men, Rodrigo Duterte and Mark Zuckerberg. That was when I was deluged with an average of 90 hate messages per hour. While meant to pound me to silence, this astroturfing, this fake bandwagon effect coming bottom up influences others. Combined with micro targeting, the disinformation networks create and seed false narratives that, like termites, slowly erode trust in institutions and the rule of law. You just have to look up my last 4 years. In 2016, pro Duterte accounts on Facebook began to create and share narratives attacking me and Rappler. Journalist equals criminal. In 2016, I laughed because by next year, I will have been a journalist for 35 years, and I thought my track record would speak for itself. Nearly 2 decades as a bureau chief and investigative reporter for CNN, 6 years running the largest news group in the Philippines, ABS-CBN, and Rappler, the startup that challenged traditional media. Watching these attacks up close, I began to realize how easy it is to manipulate people on social media, where meaning is atomized, where every statement is bereft of context except its position on your newsfeed. That was 2016. In 2017, those seeded messages, journalist equals criminal, now spreading virally bottom up, they came top down. President Rodrigo Duterte essentially called us criminals, accusing Rappler of being foreign owned in his State of the Nation address. That isn't true, but that unleashed the state, weaponizing the law. A little more than a week later, we got our first subpoena. 2018, the Philippine government filed 11 cases against me and Rappler. It started in January when a regulatory agency revoked our license to operate, a brazen attempt to shut us down. We fought back and we're still operating today, yet these cases are meant to intimidate us to silence and take up our time and our money. In 2019, the courts issued 8 arrest warrants for me, filing 8 criminal cases against us in 3 broad buckets: cyber libel, tax evasion, securities fraud. All of this as ludicrous as the first. In order to bring us to court for tax evasion, the government reclassified Rappler as, and this is a direct quote, a dealer in securities, like a stock brokerage. In a little over a month, I was arrested twice and detained overnight, an arrest timed for the closing of the courts, so I couldn't post bail and would be forced to spend the night in jail. And then in 2020, I was convicted of cyber libel. What seemed ludicrous in 2016 is now a fact. This is how democracy dies. I learned that you don't really know who you are until you're forced to fight for it. It's like I spent my entire career going to the gym, training for this moment, and I'm now ready for battle. Because that's exactly what this is. It's a battle for facts, a battle for meaning, a battle for values. Thank you again for giving us energy and support for our shared global battle. This time demands we all ask ourselves one question: what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Imagine it, embrace it, then go and do it now.